Hello, welcome or welcome back. It is time for a book haul. I have got a ton of books to show you here, so I'm going to go ahead and get to it. It is also really hot outside, so it seemed like the perfect time to just sit inside and talk about some books. I have a really large pile of books here to talk to you about, like I mentioned, and what happened was that I had the opportunity to go out of town a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, and I realized at the very last minute, right before we were about to leave and put stuff in the car, that I could bring some of my books that I was unhauling with me. In all fairness, I brought back with me 10 fewer books than I left with. And that includes the books that I then bought after that while I was in that city going to bookstores. So let me go ahead and get into it. I'm super excited about all of these, but honestly, some more than others, and I'll explain that when I get to the used bookstore picks. But the first one I happened to pick up is a book that I did buy new. It is a book that honestly, I've seen around over and over again and had kind of briefly glanced at the back of the book one time and wasn't sure if I wanted to get it. And that book is The Old Drift. And I'm not really sure why I was hesitating to get this book because I looked at it every time I came across it in a store and just kept going, oh, I don't know. And then I recently read the book Chintu, and when I was looking up other books that were like that, this book came up and I was like, okay, that's all I need to know. I'm finally going to get it, and I knew exactly where to go to buy it. So what is The Old Drift about? It says in 1904, on the banks of the Zambezi River, a few miles from the majestic Victoria Falls, there was a colonial settlement called The Old Drift. In a smoky room at the hotel across the river, an old drifter named Percy M. Clark, foggy with fever, makes a mistake that entangles the fate of an Italian hotelier and an African busboy. This sets off a cycle of unwitting retribution between three Zimbabwe families, black, white, and brown, as they collide and converge over the course of the century. So it is a story of colonialism. It's also a multi-generational story. And yeah, all of that just really fascinated me. It's definitely going to deal with race and, like I said, colonialism in Africa, that kind of thing. Some of those things were touched on in Chintu, not all of them, but that book I'm going to say is the one that led me to finally being able to make up my mind about this book. So it'll be nice to continue to read more books off of that other book, I guess. Anyway, moving on to the next book. So I did pick up two books that are sort of inspired in one way or another by 1001 Nights, or that story in general. The first one is Arabian Nights and Days. This is by Naguib Mahfouz, who I have also read the Cairo trilogy of his and finished that whole trilogy this year, really enjoyed it. And then when I was looking up other books that he had written and saw that he did his own sort of shortened version of Arabian Nights, I was like, oh gosh, yeah, that's combining two things that I really enjoy. Somebody whose writing I like, as well as a story that I also enjoy. I'm looking, and on this book itself, it doesn't explain anything about his edition, but I know, other than the fact that it's just very short, so it's obviously not all the stories, that there was something in particular that he had in mind when he wrote it. But it's a selection of stories from 1001 Nights. The other book that I got is 1001 Nights, a retelling, and this is by oh, here it is, Hanan Al-Shaykh. And I don't know, I feel like I have mixed feelings about retellings and reimaginings, but they always like pique my interest, and so I've been reading more of them lately. This one in particular I was intrigued by because it is sort of a more modern English telling of it, which is sometimes an issue with 1001 Nights, but I think it's also a more feminist version or feminine version, or more from the viewpoint of women, something along those lines, which is something that I've been curious about, because even though there are a lot of women in 1001 Nights for sure, and you even get some stories about them, that kind of thing, every now and then I can't help but feel like this story would probably be different if it was more focused on the women. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with that book. Okay, another one that I picked up, also new, so far all of these I believe I bought new, is The Foxwife. Now this is a fantasy story, I believe, that has gone around. It's kind of also a retelling or reimagining of like just the general myth or idea of a fox wife. And I recall when this book came out that it was really popular. I hadn't had it sort of on my mind or had been thinking about reading it anytime soon, but one of the things I've been enjoying recently is asking people who work at the bookstores that I visit what book of anything in the store they would recommend. And in this case, I was talking to a store owner, and this was the book that she recommended. This book is set in the last years of the Qing Empire. A courtesan is found frozen in a doorway. Her death is clouded by rumors of foxes luring people to their demise by transforming into beautiful women and handsome men. Bao, a detective with an uncanny ability to sniff out the truth, has been intrigued by the fox gods, yet they've remained tantalizingly out of reach until he is hired to uncover the dead woman's identity. And I think that's just such an interesting combination of things, that you have a detective story, but you also have like this sort of magical, mythical legend about fox wives, and that it's also including like fox gods and fox men. So yeah, I'm excited to get to that story, and hopefully it's as good as the store owner suggested. On a totally different type of read, I have been finding myself picking up more and more books that happen to be horror. I'm not a horror reader. There are some things about it that can bother me, but I do occasionally find myself drawn to books that, as a subgenre, will have horror listed, and this is one of them. And that is A Botanical Daughter. I thought this cover was also very appealing, but that's not what interested me in the story. So it says, "It is an unusual thing to live in a botanical garden, but Simon and Gregor are an unusual pair of gentlemen, hidden away from the disapproving tattle of Victorian London. They are free to follow their own interests without interference. For Simon, this means working his taxidermical art. Gregor's business is exotic plants, lucrative but harmless enough, until his latest acquisition, a strange fungus which shows signs of intellect beyond any plant he's ever seen, inspires him to attempt a masterwork, true intelligent life from plant matter." There are so many parts of that description that interest me deeply, such as it being set in Victorian London, but it's obviously a book written in modern times. It's the two men living together in a sort of an isolated setting, doing their own thing. I find taxidermy really odd and yet an amazing skill. I actually went into a taxidermist shop one time. If you ever find one, go in. It's incredible. Not weird. Trust me, it's incredible. And then like this sort of AI feel with a intelligent plant life a la Little Shop of Horrors. I don't know. I couldn't help myself. I had to get it. At a used bookstore, a different one than where I exchanged all my credit, I did find this lovely little book, and not a super exciting cover, but I was happy to come across it. The Family of Pascual Duarte. And this was a book that was actually recommended by one of my viewers, Ricardo. He has his own channel, I'll link it below. And he had suggested this. I had asked him a recommendation about a couple of different things. I don't remember specifically what it was we were talking about, but this was a book he mentioned, and when I found it, I was like, I'm getting it. I'm so excited. Okay, I picked up a couple of nonfiction works. One of the things in nonfiction that I've been finding works well for me and that I just love and that I will read over and over again are nonfiction books that are about books and that are about reading in general or people's experience reading things. There are so many books along those lines that I want to read, and one of the ones that I saw that I decided to pick up is The Year of Reading Dangerously: How 50 Great Books and 2 Not So Great Ones Saved My Life. And this is by Andy Miller. And I love the fact that it even includes like 2 books that he apparently really didn't like. And this is just his experience. A working father whose life no longer feels like his own discovers the transforming powers of great and downright terrible literature in this laugh out loud memoir. I do like a memoir sometimes. They're not always like amazing for me, but I think that's celebrity memoirs. So I am hoping that this, everyday working father's memoir about like books, and, of course I checked to make sure that in the back there was going to be a book list, and there is. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to hearing him talk about his books, and maybe I'll, read dangerously the 50 books and the 2 that he didn't like. I also picked up The Tiger's Wife. This is one of the ones that came from the used book collection. And now that I think about it, I'm going to save all those to the end because that's going to be the most random selection of books that I picked up. I got every book using as much of my credit as possible. But before I get into that stack, let me finish with the books that I bought new. Okay, I think this is right. So I could be wrong, but I just have 5 more that I think I bought new or used from other places, not with store credit. So the next 2 that I'm going to show, since I just showed you the one nonfiction before I showed you that used book, I'm going to talk about are also both nonfiction, and there are also more books that are about books. I wasn't intending to buy this many books along those lines, but both of these just, I don't know, really caught my attention, so I went for it. The first one is Once Upon a Tome, and this is by Oliver Darkshire, and I also just love the size and just the cover. It's so pretty and unique, and I really like the green, so that drew my eye to it. But then I looked at it and I found the description really appealing and like something I'd want to read. And then when I was paying for it, I was at what turned out to be the favorite bookstore that I visited, and I will put the name of that bookstore below. And I was talking to the 2 owners who were just the loveliest, like bookish people. They were my people for sure. Like if I lived in that city, I would be going to that bookstore all the time. Didn't matter where I lived in that city, that would be my bookstore. Because they were also like, "You're a bookish person, aren't you?" And I was like, "Yes, I know. We're friends." And they also recommended a really good Mexican restaurant to eat around the corner from them. We have no good Mexican food where I live, so that was amazing as well. But when they saw this book, they were both like, "That's a really good book. We really like this book." Anyway, let me tell you about this book, because I'm telling you about so many other things other than just the books that I picked up. Anyway, it says, "Welcome to Southrons." Pretty sure that's not how you say that. "One of the oldest bookstores in the world, with its weird and wonderful clientele, suspicious cupboards, unlabeled keys, poisoned books, and some things that aren't even books, presided over by one deeply eccentric apprentice." And if you go on to read the description of what this book is about, it is going to sound like some sort of magical bookstore meets bookseller, quirky, lovely, bookish fiction, but it is nonfiction. And to me, that just brought it over the top. And even when I was sitting there looking at it on my own, I honestly couldn't tell whether it was fiction or nonfiction. And I don't think it said anywhere, obviously. And it wasn't until I got to the cash register and the owner saw this as she was checking me out that she was like, "This is so good. And you're going to think it's fiction because it's so wild." But she's like, "But it's nonfiction." So I'm glad it wasn't just me that was really confused by that. The next one I got is A Pound of Paper, Confessions of a Book Addict. I can relate to these people. Mind you, all 3 of these were from the same bookstore. A Pound of Paper, the weight more or less of a book, is the peg on which the book collector extraordinaire John Baxter hangs each charming episode of this utterly engaging memoir. In one brilliantly readable and funny scene after another, readers come in contact with such literary greats as Graham Greene, Kingsley Amis, and Ray Bradbury. Along the way, we discover how a boy from the Australian bush came to live in a Paris penthouse with a library worth millions. Sounds a bit like privileged and over the top, but at the same time, he's got a whole bunch of books. So, I don't know. I couldn't help myself with that one either. All right, now we're back to some regular books that I picked up. I found this one, A Tale of Two Worlds, or I guess it's D, A Tale of Two Worlds. I was curious by the fact that it's by Michel Faber, and yes, I did just recently DNF a book by him, but I did like another work that he read, and I'm hoping that this one sort of smooths the road out between 2 of them. I don't know. We'll see. It says, "It all starts on the morning the letter D disappears from the language," which also reminds me of the book Elemental P. First, it vanishes from the Kilo's parents' conversation at breakfast, then from the road signs outside and from her school dinners. Soon the local dentist and the neighbor's Dalmatian are missing, and even the donkey derby has been called off. Though she doesn't know why, Kilo, I'm not really sure how to say her name, but I'm sure that the D is going to go missing from it in this book, is summoned to the home of teacher Professor Dotterfield and his faithful Labrador, Nellie Robinson. That's a really interesting name for a Labrador. And this is where our story begins. So I love that. I really loved the book LMNOP, but hadn't ever got to the point where I felt like rereading it. So I feel like this is my way of rereading that story, but in a different way. Like, letters are missing, but in this case only one. If you haven't read LMNOP, all the letters go missing. They don't really go missing, but you have to stop using them. All right, the next book is Earthlings. And I know you guys told me don't go to Earthlings next. Sorry. I couldn't help myself. The more people were like, don't do it, the more I kind of wanted to do it. And I did have the choice between this and one of her other works, but this was the one that I wanted to read. And what I've been noticing recently is that, well, yes, sometimes what I want to read is not going to work and it was the wrong book and I shouldn't have picked that. But I have learned a few tricks of the trade to figure out books that I will like, and I'm hoping this is one of them. I have no one to blame but myself. That's basically what this is coming down to. Okay, so I read Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, and I really enjoyed that book. It was a lot deeper and went to a lot of different places that I wasn't expecting, and I really liked the way she worked the characterization into that book and kind of left where you as a reader felt about that character up to you. And so I want to read more by her. Again, I was told not to read this one next, but I did it anyway. I did talk to the person who was working at the bookstore who had read this about the book. She made me feel a little bit better, so if this was a bad choice, I blame her. No, really, it'll be my own fault. Okay, it says, from the beloved author of the cult sensation Convenience Store Woman, which has sold over 1 million copies worldwide, Earthlings is a spellbinding novel about childhood dreams and adulthood rebellion. Natsuki is a young girl who feels like she's dropped into her family from an alien planet. Her best friend is a plush toy hedgehog named Piyut, and her only family friend is her cousin Yu. Natsuki and Yu spend their summers in wild mountains of Nagano, dreaming of other worlds. And then a terrible sequence of events threatens to part the children forever, and they make a promise to survive no matter what. And it goes on from there. And all of that sounds really good to me. I was a major daydreamer in childhood. Hopefully I haven't steered myself wrong. There's only one way for me to find out. The next book is a book that I saw at the store and I picked up the second I saw it and said, absolutely yes, this is what I came for. Not literally, I didn't go to the store knowing they had it, but if I did know that, I would have gone to that store just to get it. And that book is Carter Beats the Devil. This is a book that I heard about. I don't even know, honestly, how I heard about it. I think I was looking up books with magicians. And yeah, this book came up, and then oddly, after that, I started seeing a couple of people talk about it, and I've been looking for the book for a couple of years now. And it's taking me until today to find it. And, well, not literally today, but it took me until I found it in the store to get it. Because it's not even easy to order online from what I could tell. Or maybe I just didn't feel like ordering it online. Anyway, I feel like I won because I found it in a store. And it's a really weird edition. Like most of the editions that I've seen, this cover is like the actual book size. But this is like a cover on a cover, is what it feels like to me. Anyway, on August 2nd, 1923, the master magician Charles Carter walks on the stage of the Curran Theater in San Francisco for the most daring performance of his life. Its climax involves a battle with the devil himself, and this evening, President Warren G. Harding is taking part. 2 hours later, President Harding will be dead. And I'm so curious. Like, it's magicians and a mystery murder, and the devil is involved in like a Faustian type of way, I'm guessing, maybe, perhaps literally, I don't know, but I want to read it really badly and have wanted to read it for a while, so if I get a C in a TBR game, don't be surprised if you see that. Okay, now I'm moving to all the used books that I bought because I had a ton of store credit to use. And so there are a random set of books. I first started by just finding the books that they had that really interested me, and then I moved on from there to just sort of grabbing anything that I thought I would read to use up some of the credit. I still have a ton of store credit left at that store, so at some point, hopefully I'll go back and be able to spend the rest of it. I don't know. Anyway, I picked up The Tiger's Wife. That's where this came in. And I recall hearing about this book, and if I recall correctly, I think a lot of people liked it, but I always get this book confused with, Isn't there like a zookeeper and his wife, the zookeeper's wife's tiger? Something like that. I'll put it up on the screen if I can find it. This one, however, is set in a Balkan city mending from war. In Natalia, a young doctor is compelled to unravel the mysterious circumstances surrounding her beloved grandfather's recent death. Searching for clues, she turns to a worn copy of the Jungle Book and the stories he told her of his encounters over the years with the Deathless Man. But most extraordinary of all is the story her grandfather never told her, the legend of the tiger's wife. And yeah, I am looking forward to reading this. I recall when it was popular way back whenever that everybody seemed to like it. So hopefully it'll be, I don't know if a nice palate cleanser, but a good book. The next one just sounded cute. This was one of the ones that I picked up like towards the end when I just started looking at every book on the fiction shelf. And it is The President's Hat. And it says on the back, could a felt hat have the power to change lives? And the basic premise of this book is that a guy, when is it set? I don't even recall. Does it even tell me? I don't think it does. But anyway, a guy's dining alone in this really nice restaurant, and he happens to be sitting next to or near the president of France. And the president gets up and leaves his hat in his seat. And the guy picks up the president's hat and takes it home. And then he decides, I believe, that he's going to wear it. And he kind of goes on a series of adventures following what happens when he puts this hat on. And maybe, maybe not, gets mistaken at times for the president, something along those lines. It sounded interesting and at least maybe fun and quirky. We'll see. I also found an edition of Fall on Your Knees. I used to own this a while back, and then I got rid of it because I didn't think I'd ever read it again, because it would be a reread for me. And then earlier this year, I read another work by Anne-Marie MacDonald, and that was Fade, and absolutely loved that. And it reminded me why I had been holding on to that copy of Fall on Your Knees for a little while, because I had bought that used with credit, thinking I would reread it at some point, and I was like, how good of a reread could it be? But after reading Fane, I was like, oh, I really do want to reread this, because I had forgotten how much I really enjoyed her writing, and how I felt about Fane, I vaguely recall remembering feeling about Fall on Your Knees. However, I don't really recall much about what this story is about, and unfortunately, the back of this edition of the book is just blurbs. So I guess I'll find out what it's about. I feel like it's like a family drama story. If you know, tell me without spoilers what it's about in the comments below. Okay, next I picked up Zorro by Isabell Allende. I have read nothing by her, but my husband loves her as an author. He's read a couple of works by her and really enjoys them. He was very intrigued when he saw I picked up Zorro, but I was like, I picked it up. I just needed another book to add on to the pile. And I did see when this came out a while back, I thought it was interesting that she sort of wrote the story of Zorro, and he's excited to read that just because he likes her writing. So I was like, okay, I'll try that one of hers. I picked up Fates and Furies because I've been wanting to try something by Lauren Groff. If they had Matrix, I might have picked up that, but they did not. And I do recall quite a few people liking this. And it also got the National Book Award finalist spot. And I do tend to like the National Book Award like winners and finalists over that of the Pulitzer Prize. So to me, that's feeling like across your fingers this might work out. And it says on the back, every story has two sides, every relationship has two perspectives, and sometimes it turns out the key to a great marriage is not its truth, but its secrets. At age 22, Lotto and Matilde, sorry, I don't have my glasses on, are tall, glamorous, madly in love, and destined for greatness. A decade later, their marriage is still the envy of their friend, but with an electric thrill, the reader realizes that things are even more remarkable than they have seemed. So yeah, story of a marriage. It'll be interesting. Fates and Furies. Okay. And then I picked up The Free, this little book. I have a book by Aldous Huxley in the same little Harper Perennial Olive editions. I really like their little olive editions. I like the size. They're almost a mass market paperback size. Maybe they actually are, but I love the simplicity, and they're a little cheaper than some of their like trade paperback size. Anyway, the odd thing about it is you have to look inside it to know what the book is about. Okay, The Free. And this one, let's see here. Veteran Leroy Carabin, after suffering a traumatic brain injury during his time in Iraq, commits an act of desperation, allowing him to retreat deep into the memories locked in his mind. Freddie McCall, who works 2 jobs and is struggling to make ends meet, has lost almost everything, propelling him to consider a lucrative and dangerous proposition. And then Pauline Hawkins, a nurse whose endless attraction to others' needs, including tending to her own elderly father, puts up emotional walls in order to cope until a new patient touches something deep and unexpected inside of her. The lives of these 3 characters intersect as they look for meaning in desperate times. Heartbreaking and hopeful, The Free is a testament to the resiliency of the human heart. So this sounds really touching and sweet. I like that at least one of the stories is touching on memory, and it's also 3 interconnected stories told in one novel, basically, is my understanding. So I thought that just sounded like a book I hadn't heard of that would be really interesting in an edition that I tend to like. I also picked up Obasan. This is another book that I picked up just because I, at one point, was looking at all the books on the shelves. They didn't have a ton of shelves. It was maybe like 4 shelves that were solidly just like general fiction of some sort. And it says, this powerful and passionate and highly acclaimed novel, it's like building up the hype there, told through the eyes of a child, the moving story of Japanese Canadians during the Second World War. Naomi is a sheltered and beloved 5-year-old when Pearl Harbor changes her life. Separated from her mother, she watches bewildered as she and her family become enemy aliens, persecuted and despised in their own land. This sounds like it's going to be a very hard, sad, touching read, and hopefully will help me learn a little bit about that experience in a different land during that time period. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's going to make me cry. All right, the next one are 2 books in a series, which I think I have the 3rd book in the series. Is this the 1st and 2nd book in the series? I don't really know. But anyway, it is The Power of One and Tandia. I will just talk about The Power of One. This is a book that I owned at one point and then unhauled. And I have to be honest, this is an older edition of the book than I had before. And I think what was throwing me off was the description of the book on the back of the other edition that I had in the cover that was making me think this book was about something totally different than what it was. Anyway, on the back of this book, it says, first with your head and then with your heart. So says Hopi Gronwald, boxing champion to a 7-year-old boy who dreams of being the welterweight champion of the world. For young PK, it is a piece of advice he will carry with him throughout his life. Born in South Africa, divided by racism and hatred, this one small boy will come to lead all the tribes of Africa. Through enduring friendships with Jaime and Gideon, PK gains the strength he needs to win out. And in the final conflict with his childhood enemy, the judge, PK will fight to the death for justice. And I feel like that was some of the part that was missing from whatever the other description was. I picked up On the Road by Jack Kerouac. I feel like this is one of those books that you hear a lot of things about. I obviously got this used, otherwise I would never buy a movie tie-in edition if it could be avoided. And it says, the novel that defined a generation. And it's inspired by his adventures with Neil Cassidy. It tells the story of 2 friends who cross-country road trips are a quest for meaning and true experience, written with a mixture of sad-eyed naivety and wild abandon, and imbued with his love of America. I've heard a lot about this. I've heard this is a great book if you like writing yourself and all that kind of thing. And yeah, I figured, well, if it's basically free because I'm exchanging books, I'd love to give it a try. I picked up The Wonder of All Things by Jason Mott, who is the, I was about to say the owner. I mean, hopefully he's that as well, but he is the author of Hell of a Book. And I really enjoyed that book. Not such a big fan of People Like Us, which was basically the sequel, but I do want to read more of his work. I kind of, in general, like a bit of how he writes and his style. So when I saw this book, I went ahead and picked it up, even if the back tells me nothing about what the book is about. But that's where that's coming from. So at some point, you'll see me read another work by him. I did also pick up the 3rd book by Emily St. John Mandel, which is part of the trilogy. I'm still confused about how this series works, but I got Sea of Tranquility. I did happen to get it in this sort of like really interesting edition because that was the only edition that was available at this used bookstore. It was also something that was recommended by one of the store people, and when I saw it was a nice edition, I was like, sure, why not? I picked up The Shipping News because this was another book that I had heard a lot of, and people rave about this book. I have also wanted to read something by this author whose last name I will not try to pronounce because I know I'm not going to say that correctly. So there's that. Again, no information on the back. Glad we've kind of gotten away from that in some books. And it says $16. That's definitely not what I paid for it, even if that, oh yeah, because they have like a really complicated pricing system at this store as well, where like if you're using credit, it's 50% off, and then you can use your credit. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, I bought this used. I had been wanting to try it. I figured it was something that I'd eventually get to like out of the library because I don't know that I would necessarily like her writing, and it's not in a genre that I would normally read from. But again, the opportunity came up to own a copy, so I bought it. A random book that I picked up there is Flight. I have never heard anything about this book, but it sounded fascinating. It says it's a hilarious and tragic portrait of an orphaned Indian boy who travels back and forth through time in a charged search for his true identity. With powerful and swift prose, Flight follows this troubled foster teenager, a boy who is not a legal Indian because he was never claimed by his father, as he learns that violence is not the answer. The journey for Flight's young hero begins as he's about to commit a massive act of violence. And this was published in 2007. So, yeah, I have lots of questions. I feel like this is going to be very intentionally controversial in how it's written. I can already think of some ways, but we'll see how it goes. Another book that I feel like is going to be controversial and I'm not even sure how I'm going to feel about or whether or not I'm going to read it is Mr. Pip. Now, the title alone drew my attention because I was like, Pip, there's a really well-known Pip, a la Charles Dickens' Great Expectations, and I was like, what are the chances that this book is about that character? And it says, on a copper-rich tropical island shattered by war, where the teachers have fled with almost everyone else, only one white man chooses to stay behind. The eccentric Mr. Watts, object of much curiosity and scorn, who sweeps out the ruined schoolhouse and begins to read to the children each day from Charles Dickens' classic Great Expectations. Love that idea. I actually picked up this book to read just a few pages from the beginning of it, like maybe a few weeks ago. What made me feel a bit more hesitant about this is that it is set on a tropical island. It is about this teacher reading to these young children and this and that, but the book opens from the perspective of a woman who is native to that island, and she is speaking in a dialect that seems somewhat dubious to me, and she is described in... Okay, sorry for that really weird cut. I was in the middle of talking to you about Mr. Pip, and then my battery died. Anyway, the main thing I was trying to just say was that I, a little while ago, tried the first chapter or two of this book, and there was some very questionable characterization that was like such a big turnoff that I was like, maybe I could already unhaul this book. Now, granted, this was like a week or two ago, and like I said, I did buy this over like a month and change ago, but it was definitely one of those where like you have those moments of, oh, if we could only just read 2 or 3 or 5 chapters before buying a book, but that didn't happen. So, oh well, we'll see how it goes, and when I come back to that, what happens to it. But I have not great expectations of it at this point. Let's see, the next book that I have is this very gold edition of The Bonfire of the Vanities. This is a book that I have thought of reading on and off. I feel like it's a fairly well-known sort of, I guess it would be like a modern classic. Is that right? Oh, 1987, even sooner than I thought. Yeah, anyway, I don't remember what put this back on my radar. It was another book that I read that something I was reading on that reminded me of this and mentioned this, and I went, oh, maybe I'm more interested in this book than I thought I was, and I had that opportunity to pick it up used, and so it seemed like the perfect time, because that definitely seems like the type of book that if I'm enjoying it enough to want to read the whole thing, that I'm also going to want to annotate it. And then the final book is one that I bought again towards the end of the book credit that I had, or the end of the amount of book credit I was willing to get. And that is this work called The Spectacular. I've never heard of it before, but it has a fun looking cover, so we'll go with that. And then what was it about how this was described? It says some people are meant to be mothers and some people are meant to be free. Okay, interesting that that's set up as a dichotomy. It's 1997, and Missy Alamo is a cellist in an indie rock band. Loving and leaving someone new on tour stops. Wait. Loving and leaving someone new on tour stops across America. Every night, crowds sing the chorus of the band's biggest hit, a song Missy wrote about the mother who abandoned her. And it goes on from there. You have a couple of different points of view, and somehow I don't remember this book about being about motherhood, probably because I never read that very top portion of it before, but it will be interesting. Definitely sounds like it's a little bit of a band type of scenario. I don't know how I'll like that, but I do like the fact that she's a cellist. I tend to like music or musicians in books. I don't think I've read a book where it's like a modern rock band type of musician or music that's being played, so we'll see how that goes. But that is everything. That is all the things. Let me know if you've read any of these books and think I should like bump them up and like prioritize them over others, or if there's ones that you're like, no girl, do yourself a favor, and if you didn't buy it new, just unhaul it now. I doubt that's going to be the case for any of them. But yeah, I'm looking forward to all of these in varying degrees, and I'm excited to see which of them pop up on an upcoming TBR. And I think the thing that I'm most excited about is that I was able to unhaul books and basically pay for all of these books using that credit. It's such a good experience to have a used bookstore in your area that does credit exchange. I wish more of them did it now. I understand that's a really tricky business model to run, but it is possible. And yeah, if you live near a used bookstore that does something like that and has good return policies, I am happy for you. Let me know what you're reading and working on, and I'll talk to you next time.